We left at like 4 afternoon, and we got back at 6 a.m.
No way.
Yeah, we were up there, and like people would like track was in the weight room, lifting the way we got back. And we were like, what? Yeah. I texted my boyfriend good night and good morning. And
All right.
Still on the bus.
Let's get rolling. Welcome back. This is our final class meeting with any sort of new content. Remember, Friday's class meeting is going to be an optional review day for the final exam. So just as a thing to have on your radar, if you're interested in doing extra credit that adds 20 points or 2% onto your grade, this is a big factor for a lot of folks who might be on the verge of passing or on the border between a grade that they'd like. 20% or 2 points or 2% or 20 points is a good buffer. So I encourage you, if you're interested in extra credit, if you join us over in Badgley 146 from 1 to 2:50, the nonprofit Oregon Rural Action is doing a presentation for my Column 310 class in which they'll be talking about the communication strategies that they've used to engage in local activism. There's also a Zoom link to attend remotely that's available on Canvas. And I will also have a recording after that presentation if you're not able to attend during that time, still want to do extra credit. There's also a prompt that I'll be asking you to complete once you've either seen it live or watched the recording. So have that on your radar, and I encourage you to recommend if anybody you know is interested in attending to do so today at 1 in Badgley 146. So I'm going to start things off a little bit differently. At this point in the term, you should have received an email to complete evaluations for your courses. This is super useful and necessary for a lot of reasons. It helps us to know what worked for you and what didn't, helps in planning future courses. We really read and look at that and take that input thoroughly. So I know some of you have already completed that, but if you haven't, I'm asking you to take some time at the beginning of class today to use the device in order to complete that. If you've already completed it, or once you've completed that, I'd like you to take a look at today's practice question. We'll talk about that together in just a bit. I know that completing an evaluation, like while I'm standing here, is maybe a little bit weird. So I'll give you about 7 or 8 minutes to complete your evaluation and then look at this practice question. Again, I appreciate you taking the time to do that. You should have received an email, or if you do a search for evaluation, that should show up for you. So I will return at about 10:10. So once I do, we will pick up from there and continue to get into this last new content.
I don't know what's happening. His type of personality is similar. It's not the wrong thing. Not just pictures. I was joking about us and completely ignored. And so the baby is I see my computer to no way. Something like making the course that you want to get. This technology, you look at my speaker shirts. He does like Star Wars stuff. I'm waiting for her birthday extra waffle one. She literally loves it. Okay, maybe I can make it. They're really soft. They're like, oh, you like food. I saw it. Have you ever seen music? You ever use like a toilet dish? Oh, yes. Remember toilet dish? Yes. You can customize it with any toilet. Oh, that's cool. Isn't it so cool? I thought we did that like my mom and my brother or something. Yeah, I love Etsy. I do too. I just ordered something off of Etsy. That's super. Yeah, hello, Etsy. I got my my brother, I got to give him a pair of socks and he thought they were. And then a few years ago, so I got my favorite.
That's funny.
And then also for me, I got this pillowcase that says "Breathe our favorite child."
That is so funny.
So
I have kids.
Bree is our favorite child.
That's really funny.
In politics. It's from Turkey. Yeah. And I know where it's already. California. I guess. Well, I ordered it like on Thanksgiving. The pair of socks.
I have what you need.
No, my pair of socks. They're not. So should be interesting. Yeah, I'm excited. I'll just do next week.
I wanted to. I told my friend to get it for but because it would be something that they would do, but I told her that she needs to do. She's like, show me the reminders. Is there anything that we need to? I think that's so much. But I really wear a box inside. I like to learn because like their relationship, like I know that would be like the perfect gift, and I was like, wait, you have to get these figures. You have to. Dude, she was like, I actually might. like you would like wear them proudly. I know that you would.
I got.
So funny.
Oh my god, I did it. I saw those and I was like,
I would be like, bye instantly.
I love it so much.
Dude.
Oh, what makes you think of
I do.
Oh, wait, Friday I don't have to go to work. We're off for the travel group. Yes.
well, you can decline from food. Keep working. Best things that you can do. Why is my actual rich?
Get out my box. I go to daycare. Literally, they like put all these sports clubs for little kids, so that gives parents the time to not have the kids around. But instead of labeling it as like a daycare or like sports
We just like do a whole bunch of activities.
Yeah.
So just zero cushion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anybody who's still working on the evaluation? Great. If you did not have a device or opportunity to complete those, I encourage you to do so by the end of the day today on your own outside of class. Again, I really appreciate you taking the time to work on those. They're really useful for me in terms of understanding and applying the things that went well, things to continue to work on. So let's talk about today's practice question. So on Monday, we spent some time talking about communication in the workplace and different styles of workplace communication. So according to Blank, we move from stranger to professional stages. How many people believe this is A, leader membership exchange, B, situational leadership model, C, workplace communication theory, D, articulation? Anybody who's uncertain? Okay. So the best answer here is A, leader-manager exchange theory. So this model suggests that over time, as we start to build trust and good relationships with people that we work with, we move from a stranger who's not very connected, we're more motivated by our self-interest, do we keep our job, but eventually we move on to a partner role. And I use the example of being involved in a radio show and starting to feel collaboration and good relationships with the sound team, with your producers, the people that you work with, and developing that closer relationship over time. Situational leadership model suggests that the type of leader you are, whether you're directing or delegating, is impacted by your own personality, but also by the dynamics of the workplace. So we looked at some different ways that people communicate on that basis. So again, Friday's class is attendance optional. It's an opportunity for you to prepare for the final exam. And then remember that the final Canvas prompt is due this Sunday. The December 12th to 14th, that 3-day window is your opportunity to take the final exam. Again, you're welcome to use the practice questions as well as the study guide to help you to prepare. So the extra credit and then any remaining assignments are due as a hard deadline by the 14th. So I recommend looking through any assignments or courses that you're missing that you need to complete makeup assignments for to just kind of wrap up. And then by that point, I'll be submitting grades and completing everything. If you have any questions about the score that you've received on any assignments or anything that you believe is an error, please let me know, and I'm happy to chat about that with you. We looked at workplace communication last class. Again, a good set of things to know as you gear up for the final exam. And today, we'll be talking about the dark side of interpersonal communication. In other words, things that are negative, hurtful, or damaging for interpersonal communication, which again, I know is kind of a sour note to end on. But what I'm hoping is that we're using the skills and ideas we talked about in this class as a chance for us to understand how to avoid some of those negative patterns that we get. Before we get started, any questions about anything? Yeah, Bryson.
Can you post these slides?
The slides for today?
Yeah. Yeah, I think for great.
Okay. So I'm seeing them here.
I don't see them online. Work on them. Yeah, mine. Yeah, I just have to read that.
Okay.
And mine?
Okay, no problem. Yeah, sometimes Canvas like saves some of the older cookies. So when it tries to update it, like is still using that older information. Great. So, you know, think the dark side, you think of Star Wars, right? Come to the dark side, we have cookies. Why would something like the dark side or the negative patterns of communication matter? Well, there's a few reasons that we care about this, and we care about understanding communication gone wrong. The dark side of communication is negative outcomes, right? Communication that's designed to hurt and to harm other people. Sometimes this is intentional, right? Sometimes this is unintentional. We might use a microaggression or engage in something that's biased without even thinking about it or intending to hurt somebody else, right? The example that I like to give about intentionality versus effect is if you're walking down a hallway, right, and you bump into somebody and you weren't looking where you were going, right? You weren't trying to hurt that person by bumping into them and maybe messing up their shoulder, but they still feel that, right? They still feel hurt by that impact. So you can apologize and tell them I didn't mean to bump you, but they're still feeling that impact. So aligning our intentionality and our outcomes, I think, is the one major way we can address some of these negative patterns. We can use good and healthy communication better, right? It lets us reflect on our communication and our ways to improve it. In other words, if we recognize communication we're doing that's unhealthy, that's toxic, that's impacting our relationships, or we're better able to identify that in other people, we can better build good and effective relationships with family, friends, and people that are significant to our lives. So one of the biggest ways that we conduct negative interpersonal communication comes oftentimes from a place of insecurity and uncertainty about our relationships. In other words, we'll use a variety of strategies that are indirect, that try to get at resolving an issue or concern that we have about our relationships without even thinking about it. Again, one really good example of this is the classic like middle or junior high example of having a crush on somebody or liking somebody, and then asking a friend to check in and see if that person likes them back, right? We use a lot of those indirect strategies of communication as a way of assessing relationships without engaging with that person. So I'm going to go over some of these in a little bit more detail and give you a couple examples to help to contextualize these. One of these is directness, right? And this is perhaps the most healthy of these different patterns. You might say, where are we in this relationship? Are we friends? Are we involved as more than just friends? Right? What is the status of our relationship? So directly asking, do you still want to be friends with me? It seems like we haven't talked. Generally is the clearest way that your concerns are expressed to that other person. There's a lot of reasons we might choose to save face and not be direct in that way. But generally speaking, directness is really conveying what our concerns are to that person. And it's considered a secret test because it's a way that we're checking in about that relationship overall. Another issue here is that of endurance, right? So endurance is a strategy that's sometimes used in which somebody does something that actively and intentionally hurts somebody in the relationship in order to see if the relationship is going to last or if the relationship is no longer going to work between those people. So for instance, you might choose to intentionally ghost somebody to see if they're going to respond to you and to try to get them to really show interest in you. You're like, well, they're not messaging me very much. I'm just going to stop. And maybe if I stop, they're eventually going to respond to me. That would be an example of endurance, right? Or saying something that's hurtful or mean in the relationship to see if that person would still be interested in communicating with you. It can be nasty, but it can be a way that people resolve their insecurities. If they really loved and cared about me, they would, even though I did this bad thing. It is the mindset that people might have here. Indirect suggestions. So I think an easy example of this is a common practice in a lot of different weddings is this idea that there's a bouquet, right? And the people who got married typically will throw the bouquet out. And there's a cultural norm that like whoever caught the bouquet is the person who will get married next. And so maybe there's a couple and one person in the couple says, hey, look, I caught the bouquet, and is saying that, not to say, hey, let's get married, but to be like, hey, the cultural norms about what it means if you caught the bouquet, right? Or maybe you have a partner who starts to talk about what their favorite type of ring is, right? Using hints and indirect suggestions that are trying to suggest a more serious phase of the relationship. Right? So using those types of hints or cultural clues is a way that we might get at something we'd like to know without actually expressing it to that person. And again, depending on culture and higher context culture, the use of indirect suggestions might be a lot more common. And they're not always negative, but they can at times become across as misleading or unclear. Public presentations. So a good example of a public presentation is doing something like tagging somebody on social media without their permission. For example, like tagging a relationship status between two people. And this is not about a consensual, supportive, mutual way of doing that, right? It's instead about testing the other person by making that information publicly available. If you tag somebody and say, I'm in a relationship with them, and you've not talked to them or followed up, that puts it on them to say, okay, yeah, that's great. I'm happy to have that be public, or whoa, what are you doing, right? So it's a way of testing the development of the relationship and how comfortable another person might be with publicly sharing that information. So again, this is a challenge that oftentimes we find where people are not feeling comfortable or ready yet to have that information. Another example here is using separation. So kind of similar to endurance, in which you would do something that was hurtful or negative to see if the relationship survives it. Separation would involve spending time away from that person in order to see if the relationship continues to last. That is, if you really love and care about this person, then you're absolutely going to continue that relationship despite that difference. So you might say, let's take a break, or we're going off to college, we're going to be in different places. Let's see if we continue to have a strong relationship despite having that distance. Third-party test. Again, so the third-party test is like the game of telephone where you have a friend at middle school who's asking for you, right? It's using an outsider to test the state of the relationship. So maybe we invite a significant other home for holidays, and we ask parents and family members, what do you think of that? How do you feel about us together, right? And while that's not necessarily bad for receiving approval and support from friends and family, the indirectness of it for people involved in the relationship might be a little bit more challenging to that person, right? What do you mean you asked your parents about this? That seems a little indirect. Triangle test, right, is manipulating a third person using things like gossip in order to find out information about the relationship. So again, a lot of this would involve a person outside of the relationship being used in order to try to acquire things that might be relevant for the people, how that relationship is viewed, and so on, right? What are people saying about us? Might be an example. So when we engage in communication that's considered to be disrespectful or incorrect or not appropriate for the context, I think a really important thing that we can do is to apologize effectively. As you might know from your own relationships, but also in terms of a lot of public figures, celebrities, famous people, there are a lot of examples of really bad apologies that are really ineffective and do not get at the issues that might be important, right? So for instance, a few years ago, there was a very publicly criticized apology in which the actor Kevin Spacey was responding to sexual assault misconduct allegations and said, this is so sorry, but I also want to take the time to say that I'm gay. And like, he was critiqued for putting those two things together and using disclosure of sexual orientation to cover for things that were incredibly inappropriate for him to do, right? So we see a lot of cases of people who are issuing apologies that just are not up to snuff. And so I think 3 steps that are important for apologies are responsibility, remorse, and a request for forgiveness. So a really negative pattern of communication that's very common is using something like an empty apology. There's a good chance, perhaps based on your cultural background or experience, considering factors such as gender, culture, and power, that you might use the word sorry a lot without necessarily even meaning to, or without sorry meaning anything for that. sorry, but I just wanted to check in and see when the deadline for that assignment is, right? You don't need to apologize for that, but oftentimes the norms and culture put us in situations where using apologies is seen as more competent. So expressing responsibility, taking responsibility for the issue, saying that this is my fault, right? Taking ownership and accountability, and recognizing what the set of issues was for which you're apologizing is really important. Rather than just saying, I'm sorry, showing that you understand what you're sorry for. It's my fault that we couldn't get this group project done on time because I wasn't able to complete my slides. Showing remorse, saying that you're sorry that you hurt other people, right? Recognizing concerns here about this process. Saying, for instance, I feel really bad that this impacted our grade on this group project. And then asking for forgiveness. I'd like to send a message to my teacher, letting them know that I didn't do this. Is there a path to forgiveness if we can deal with this, right? So apologizing effectively is generally involving these steps. Again, specificity is a good thing, but just throwing around apologies left and right is generally not a good strategy. In addition to this, and I'm going to be breaking down each of these in more detail too, we have hurtful messages, many of which I'm sure you're familiar with, but I think that their relationship to interpersonal communication is really important for us to understand and to use. So an evaluation, right, ultimately includes the word value in it. It's making a value judgment or assessing the worth of someone or something, right? This idea of value is comparing different things. And in this case, an evaluation is considering whether somebody is worth it. So saying you're not worth my time or you're not good enough for me would be a hurtful message because it's taking a human being, right, and trying to quantify them into value, such as value for your time. So that can be hurtful because it's making an assessment about a person rather than about the ideas or issues that individual might experience. One of the most common logical fallacies is the ad hominem fallacy, right? Where we critique the person rather than critiquing the arguments or ideas that they say. So rather than saying, you're stupid, I disagree with this idea or this thought that you came up with. An accusation, right, is responding by giving somebody responsibility or blame. And this can be hurtful if it's done in a way that's not accurate or appropriate for the situation, right? So to say, this is all your fault, and blaming a certain member of the group on a presentation not working, when all members of the group were perhaps involved, would be a big issue here, right? Or issuing an accusation without any sort of support or evidence or explanation to justify that accusation be another example of this happening in a negative way. A directive, right? So a directive can at times be very dramatic. I think one of the kind of funny meme examples I've seen over the years is, don't talk to me and my daughter ever again, right? Go away and never come back. Oftentimes, especially in a heated argument or disagreement, we'll provide a directive that we don't actually need or want, but we issue at the time because of a heightened emotional state, right? So oftentimes directives are used in a way of punctuating the frustration that we experience towards somebody. So an informative statement, right? So an informative statement, it's kind of spilling the tea, it's sharing and disclosing something that's personal and impacts other people, but it's providing information with the intent to hurt somebody else, right? There's something you should know about Ruby. She's not who she says she is, using that information to try to hurt or compromise a relationship, rather than presenting it in a way that might be open or welcoming or designed to support relationships. A statement of desire. We can oftentimes think about this as like a parting shot. Like if a relationship ends, you might dramatically say, well, I never liked you anyway, or I actually want to be with you, right? That's sharing a preference or feeling about the topic in a way that's meant to be hurtful. And again, we see this portrayed in a very dramatic way. Maybe somebody is storming out of a room and says, and you know what? I never liked your music. And just like throws all the records on the floor. That'd be using a statement of desire in a way that is intended to hurt the other person. So Merriam-Webster made the 2022 word of the year gaslighting. And as a lot of people said afterwards, no, they didn't. So that term gets used a lot to, it's one of those terms I feel like gets used in a way that almost like makes that term lose a lot of meaning. But as it's kind of understood and defined, right, it's about intentionally causing somebody to doubt their own senses or perception of reality by intentionally making them doubt that information. And I mention this because I think this is a good way of thinking about advising statements, right? We're asking and providing information to somebody about what they should or shouldn't do, how they should or shouldn't behave, or perhaps gatekeeping them, or making claims that might not be accurate about them. Like, you shouldn't be an astronaut, no way, there's no way you could do that. Or you don't have a good singing voice, you shouldn't do that, right? Trying to put down, hurt, or direct somebody in providing unsolicited advice or diminishing somebody's self-esteem or self-worth is an example here of an advising statement. Oftentimes, we see people who will directly, when they achieve a major goal in life, respond to those advising statements. People told me that I couldn't get here or that I couldn't do this, but here I am, I graduated, right? So advising statements can backfire in situations like that. A question. Right? So sometimes we ask a question in a way that's intended to be hurtful, such as saying, hey, why haven't you been promoted yet? Or, you know, trying to probe and put something on somebody else, like putting a burden on that person in a way that maybe causes guilt for them, using questions in that hurtful context. Threats, right? So threats, of course, would be really bad to do. Threats can be made against somebody's life, but threats can be made more generally toward a person, such as the use of blackmail, right, or social pressure. You know, saying, hey, if you don't pay me, it'd be a real shame if this photo that you took got out, right? Like using that type of blackmail communication, of course, would be incredibly damaging and using control as a way to achieve that. Jokes, right? So when I was a kid, I had kind of a bowl haircut. It was pretty bad, but I was called Mophead when I was like in 5th grade, and it stuck with me. But oftentimes using jokes, using humor that's meant to be cruel and meant to make fun of other people would be an example here of hurtful communication too, right? I think a lot of times when we talk about jokes and using humor, I think one of the ways to think about this is who's the person impacted by the humor and are they in on it or okay about that, right? I can joke about that now, but at the time that joke was meant in a way that was designed to demean or hurt. So thinking about who's impacted by jokes and how they're taking them, I think is an important consideration too. And a lie, right? Lies, of course, stack up. Sometimes we use white lies or misleading information to manage relationships, but using lies in ways that intend to be harmful, such as, you know, being with a friend, feeling embarrassed about that friend's behavior and saying, oh, we don't know each other, would be an example of using deception to hurt the relationship. What do you mean? We're friends. So when people say things that are designed to hurt us, right, there's a variety of approaches that we can take. One of them is being active and verbal. So again, this is using directness as a way of responding to somebody. So responding to a charge with countercharge, no, I'm not dumb, you're dumb, right? That's like a schoolyard common refrain where people are just going back and forth without getting anywhere. Sometimes you can defend yourself and say, no, I actually do know you. We met last week. Or asking for an explanation. You know, the other day you told me that I couldn't graduate. You said that that wasn't possible for me, and I'd like to better understand why that is, right? Oftentimes that can be a useful strategy that puts somebody else on the spot. We also have what's known as acquiescent responses. where you're crying, conceding, or apologizing, or essentially giving into and accepting the hurtful message somebody gave, and saying, oh, you're right, there's no way that I can graduate, I can't do this, I'm sorry, right? Which involves internalizing that hurtful message, which again speaks to the power and danger that these types of messages have. And then an invulnerable response, right? The kind of common phrase you might have heard in school is, I'm rubber, your glue bounces off me, sticks to you, right? Saying and conveying that you're not impacted by other people being hurt, even if you are to some extent, such as ignoring a message, choosing to laugh and be in on that message, or showing that the message just didn't affect you. Like, oh, well, that doesn't bother me. You say I can't graduate, like, whatever, you don't know me. That would be an example of using invulnerable responses here. If you're ever looking for hurtful messages or trying to better understand them, just scroll down to the comments section on the internet. We also have what's known as relational aggression, right? Aggression and hurtful strategies that are happening in our relationships, such as using confrontation, like name calling, teasing, or rejecting people. You know, saying that somebody doesn't belong, that they shouldn't be there. But we can also hurt people through non-confrontation, which might involve gossip, rumors, manipulation, and so on, right? Saying, oh, hey, this person, I've heard a few things about our new transfer student, right? This student is not who they think, not who they say they are. We might be using non-confrontational strategies here. So it's practicing this idea of aggression or harm toward others in our relationships. If you're looking for a really good example of relational aggression, and this is one that a lot of folks have talked about in other classes, go watch the movie Mean Girls. This entire movie, the premise is about teenage high school clique and the ways that members of that clique, right, the plastics are very hurtful toward each other, toward new members, use kind of rituals and behavior, gossiping and spreading false information in a way that hurts other people. One thing to think about here is that with the internet and new technology, a lot of that type of communication is moving online, right? People using the circulation of media messages online as a way of hurting other people. Venting, minimizing the role, and victim blaming are strategies that tend to come more in college, right? So we gossip a lot as teenagers, but as we move into college, we tend to use a little bit more of these kinds of indirect strategies toward other people. So we've mentioned some of these ideas to an extent already, but verbal aggression is an example of attacking somebody's concept, trying to create sort of pain and hurt that person through our verbal communication with them, right? So one good example of this is following COVID-19 and it spreading to the United States. There was an increase of verbal aggression directed toward Asian American and Pacific Islander individuals, and saying things such as, oh, you're a virus or you're part of the virus, even if they were born in the United States and had no experience or context that would cause that to be true, right? So there was a campaign that emerged in which we had Asian American and Pacific Islanders who responded by holding out the sign saying, I'm not a virus, again, speaking to the role of verbal aggression. So we use verbal aggression through attacking somebody's character, again, an ad hominem or attacking the person rather than their arguments. We might attack their competence. Again, this is something that we've seen a lot in a lot of social and political discussions, assuming that somebody is not competent or able to achieve a task or issue. Look at this person, they have this disability, therefore they can't do this thing in a way that's limiting. We might attack somebody's background or experience, saying that they came from a location or place that we think negatively of. We might make fun of their physical appearance or call them names. Teasing, which is this recurring making fun of or making humor at their expense. Ridiculing, you know, making a public display out of somebody else. As we talked about, the use of threats, swearing or nonverbal emblems, right? Showing our frustration toward another person through that type of communication, but also fit under the definition of verbal aggression. The issue of bullying, as we know, is a really big problem. In fact, bullying contributes to, in cases of a lot of children and teenagers, right, self-harm, suicide, and mental health impacts that perpetuate for a very prolonged period of time. A lot of initiatives have been designed to address and try to understand bullying. But I think the thing that really makes bullying unique, right, is its use of power. That it's somebody that has some level of power or authority over another person. We might think about the trope, right, of the strong person at a school, right, who like throws somebody against the locker and demands their lunch money, right? It's using power in that way, which can happen physically, you know, using physical bullying, making, beating somebody up, hurting someone, using verbal language such as threats, I'm going to follow you home, right? Or using it in our relationships through manipulation are examples of bullying happening. But its recurrence as well as its use of power are elements that really characterize that. And as mentioned, one of the biggest shifts that we've seen is a move towards cyberbullying, bullying online. It's using electronics, it's using messages, it's circulating through social media, it's repetitive. And there's some question and still ongoing discussion about recognizing if it's had a worse impact than bullying face-to-face. Obviously, somebody can shut off the message or block somebody, but the ability to message and engage somebody well outside of the way that they normally talk to them, like continuing to get text or circulation on social media, is a way that cyberbullying can be worse. As we've talked about, behavior in the workplace can be really negative and hurtful too, including the use of bullying and hurting other people, using threats, intimidation, isolating people, for instance, providing them like a cubicle or an office space really far away from everybody else, threatening to hurt their professional identity or limiting their career opportunities. Again, that role of power, like a boss saying, well, nobody's going to hire you after this, right? Obstructing work or work-life balance, you know, saying you need to go work on the weekend. I don't care that you got this time off. You need to do this thing, right? Or denying justice, right? Trying to retaliate and say, if you come forward about this issue in the workplace, you can kiss your job goodbye, right? That type of behavior and, you know, the really negative patterns we see in the workplace are directly coming from the power that employers might have to hurt other people. When it comes to aggression and issues that might happen here, right, we generally have two different choices that we might make about how we respond. And this is based on how considerate we are of the person and also considerate of how open we are of communication, right? Assertion and being assertive would generally be seen as considering other people and being open, right? Saying, hey, I really don't appreciate it when you call me this name or behave in this way. You're trying to be caring and thoughtful to them, but also being direct. Right? Aggression might be something like, well, what did you say to me? And responding perhaps by being aggressive too. You're not really caring about the other person, but you are expressing how you feel. You might be passive. We're not open, but you do consider another person, such as saying, I'm sorry, here you go, here's the lunch money. Or you might be passive aggressive, in which you are neither open nor considerate of other people. You might say, oh, wow, it's the first time I've ever heard you call me this before, right? So it's not meant to be direct or supportive of that person, but it's not direct, not meant to be open about how you're feeling either. So we have a few different strategies that we can use here in how we address the aggression or behavior that other people practice. We also can use deception, right? Such as providing somebody the wrong information, concealing or hiding details about a relationship, right? Such as, cheating on somebody or using equivocation. A classic example, right, is Bill Clinton's famous statement, "I did not engage in sexual relations with that woman," right? Equivocation in that based on, right, definitionally what infidelity or cheating was, that there were ways that he technically was correct, but also being misleading in how he chose to communicate. And we choose to be deceptive and unclear for a lot of different reasons. Again, if we think back to face negotiation theory, we use things such as white lies or indirect communication in order to try to maintain positive relationships with other people, manage our face, right, and our public perception. We might be in a culture in which acquiescing to that other person and their demands would be seen as more culturally acceptable based on power relationships and so on. So there's a lot of cultural and behavioral reasons that our communication might not be direct or honest. And domestic violence, of course, is incredibly important and a significant issue. Willful intimidation, assault, battery, or other abusive behaviors. Here at EOU, we do have a privileged campus advocate and Title IX coordinator, both of whom are designed to support you in the event that you or anyone that you know in your life is experiencing domestic violence and is in need of additional support. Domestic violence has pretty significant impact on really large swaths of the population, so it's important to recognize this as well. In terms of addressing issues like violence, right, oftentimes it's out of the belief that violence is a constructive way to resolve the conflict, but using things like reconciliation and apology, particularly at earlier stages of the relationship, and recognizing that those alternatives exist, that violence doesn't have to be the way to solve the problem, can be really important ways that we improve our communication overall. So, what I'd like you to do in the remaining time that we have here is take some time to think about the hurtful messages we've discussed and which do you find to be the most harmful or destructive? And then lastly, of the ways that we respond to these hurtful messages, what might be the best way to respond to this type of hurtful message? So I'll give you a couple minutes to think about this. You can just note which hurtful message you think is the worst and just explain how you might choose to respond to that message. As you're wrapping up today, we had the chance to talk about hurtful messages negative patterns of communication, again, speaking at the dark side of communication, might be asked to apply and use some of these ideas in terms of reflecting on your own communication in a final exam for essay questions. Remember that Friday's class is attendance optional review for the final exam, and that we have our extra credit presentation at 1 p.m. today. So you're welcome to continue finishing this up. Once you've finished, that's your ticket out, so you can email or pass that over to me. If you're coming in on Friday, look forward to seeing you. Otherwise, best of luck as you're wrapping up your courses and getting ready for your final exams.
Here? Oh, actually, I want to keep
See? Thank you.